Christian parenting.
Where do you turn when life turns upside down?
Is there hope for the hurting? Can we find joy in the sorrow?
This is the Life Upside Down podcast with Abel Speaks, and we're your hosts, Daniel and Kelly Crawford.
Let's jump into today's episode. Okay, friends, welcome to what will be the final episode of Season 1 of the Life Upside Down podcast. That's right, 2020 is coming to a close. Nobody's really that sad about that. You might be sad that there will be no more episodes coming from us here in the coming weeks, but hey, happy holidays to you. I should say Merry Christmas. And thanks for being along for the ride, if you have been along for the ride. If not, you can retroactively go buckle in and hope you'll catch up. But for those of you who have listened to these first 11 episodes of Life Upside Down with Abel Speaks, I'm going to make an ask, actually, that I have not made yet. And that would be to rate this podcast. If you got this far and you're thinking it is something you enjoy, something that we invite you to share with friends and could bless others and has blessed you, then if you leave a rating for us, that allows more people to find it. So win-win-win for everybody involved, we hope and pray. And so I'll give you a minute to just do that right now. Okay, I'm bluffing, but really you can push pause, rate the podcast real quick, and then hit resume. Because you're going to want to come right back here for what will be the final episode of 2020, which we are going to just take some top moments from the year and from our conversation, some highlight moments to kind of recap some of the threads that we touched on throughout these conversations that hopefully will give you just a little bit of a dose if you did miss any of them to want to go back and hear more and then just kind of catch you up to speed a little bit. And so it is actually, I've spoken in the plural. I've been saying we. It's really me today. Kelly is in Waco being an ambassador for Abel Speaks right now. On business, and I'll say me, okay? I am known for not exactly getting out in front of things, bit of a procrastinator. We're up against the deadline, people, okay? So you get me today. I'll say this. I'll say that it's fair, and I've kind of already said it, that 2020 has been filled with quite a few firsts. And also probably fair to say that most of those firsts were not exactly desirable, but hey, that's kind of an illustration for life in a fallen world. And that's kind of a fitting context for our first podcast initiative here, Life Upside Down with Abel Speaks. And so powered by our friends at Christian Parenting, we certainly pray that this new podcast was able to serve as a bright spot in the midst of a tough season. And so it may seem counterintuitive to think that a podcast largely centered around the theme of sorrow and suffering and struggling would qualify as a bright spot, but that's just the thing we hope to establish. Rather than simply sulking these interviews, these conversations, they document parents striving to walk with God and cling to His promises when life turns upside down. And in doing so, these interviews capture a really beautiful sentiment, which is that joy and hope can and do coexist alongside pain and hardship. In fact, that is exactly where we begin as we launch into this year-end recap and some of our favorite moments from Season 1 of Life Upside Down. And so going all the way back, Episode 1, in the first episode, Kelly and I began by just sharing some of what led to the creation of the podcast, and we followed that with just our own personal story, our journey of how life turned upside down for us in 2015, and some of the ways that God has taken a story marked by loss and suffering and transformed it into a ministry marked by hope and joy that we call Abel Speaks. And so here's just a quick clip from my beautiful bride, Kelly. Miss you, Kel.
We had Abel in January of 2016. Got to take care of him for 15 days outside of the womb. And so those were simultaneously the best and the hardest 15 days of our lives. No parent would choose to lose a child, but we really look back on Abel's life with such joy, and we really see his life as such a gift, and are able to look back on that season with very few regrets. I think our heart is just in this podcast is we want people to know that joy and sorrow can and do coexist. That's a part of the human experience this side of eternity. And so even in the midst of really hard things, we can come to know our Creator more. And it's a humbling thing to know that the Lord used our son's life to help us know God more and be more intimately acquainted with him through our suffering.
So our aim in that opening conversation was really to just chart the course for the many meaningful conversations with amazing guests in the weeks that were to follow. And so let's follow that polished and predetermined segue into episode 2, shall we? If you have ever felt like the hits just kind of keep on coming one after another, then this conversation will resonate with you. Kelly and I sat down with Brett and Chrissy Billman to discuss their ongoing journey just through multiple health issues and physical afflictions, from discovering a brain tumor while pregnant to battling diabetes and autoimmune diseases, all before the age of 35, by the way. The Billmans, they unpack some of what their story so far has taught them about pain and perspective, comparison, faith, and ultimately the God that they have strived to seek in and through it all. And so here's just a 2-minute clip from Brett and Chrissy.
I would love to be able to sit here and say, like, oh, the goodness of God is just constantly on my mind. There are days it does suck. And having friends, Chris alluded to this, having friends that allow you to say that without trying to jump in and correct your theology, right, or immediately like, oh, but God is good. And we'll just sit with you and say, like, yeah, gosh, that stinks. Mm-hmm. It's so good. It is so good to have those people around you, because there are plenty of days that I don't feel like I can go on, and I don't have to, because there are other people lifting me up consistently in my life.
I think for me, being a mother of 3 very young, very energetic children, sometimes it's really hard for me to not compare myself to other moms. And so just having that moment where I go, I'm too tired, or I don't feel well, or my joints hurt too much, I can't play this with you, even though that's what probably normal moms are doing. And so that seems to be one of the biggest struggles that I face right now, just being young and having young children. Right. And so just being reminded that I'm not quote unquote normal, and I don't live a quote unquote normal life. And so just trying to wrestle with the Lord on, hey, what is this doing to my children? This isn't just affecting me anymore. It's affecting those that are so important around me. I was thinking about it just today. My youngest pulled out one of my medications out of my purse, and she goes, "What's this?" And I said, "It's mommy's medicine." And I kind of thought to myself, I go, how many times do I say, that's mommy's medicine, that's mommy's medicine? And so how, a lot of parents, they take Tylenol or Motrin, and that's mommy's medicine, and they see it, once a month, kind of deal. And so just how different that is, and how that is also affecting my little people.
Yeah, so that just serves as a quick glimpse, and one of the glimpses that the Billmans gave our listeners into their day-to-day back in episode 2. And that was titled, "Why Is This Happening to Me?" The episode was titled that just to fit with the theme of putting authentic words onto thoughts that we so often have as we wrestle with the Lord in a painful season, be it physically, emotionally, spiritually, or all of the above. Next up, we became fast friends with Jacob Robinson, as we were actually guests on his podcast, Chasing What Matters, and decided to turn the tables on he and his wife, Melissa. Sometimes suffering can amplify slowly over a season, but sometimes there are life-altering events where everything changes in one fell swoop. And so Jacob and Melissa graciously shared their story of watching their son Pierce move from health to sickness to significant special needs in a matter of days. And in doing so, they opened up about the roller coaster ride of wrestling with God throughout their new normal, struggles with control, comparison, the lies that they've been tempted to believe, and some of the myths and the misunderstandings that they and we are likely to encounter as we endure hardship as followers of Christ. And so on episodes 3 and 4, they weighed in on questions like, does God ever give us more than we can handle? Which I loved their response to that question. And as we'll hear in this clip, the big question of, can my faith change my circumstances? Here's Melissa and Jacob.
I think that he does. He may not change our circumstances, but I think he can change our heart in our circumstances. And that's what I think that one of the things we've learned a lot about prayer is just, I think our prayer changed from, we still do pray for healing. And I think that the Lord wants, us to present the desires of our heart to him. But even more so than that, I think our prayer had to turn into, Lord, your will, not mine, and
Yeah, I mean, just to jump off that, I think that's it, right? Of like, if you have enough faith, well, listen, if I have enough faith, I want my heart to be more like Jesus's heart. And the problem is, this day and age, whether we want to call it prosperity gospel, whether we just want to call it Western culture, whatever it may be, we view this genie in a bottle, whether we know it or not. We are guilty. That's why we can say this. We are guilty of it, right? Hey, I'm gonna ask you for these things, and then I would like them done in a timely manner, to my expectations. Thank you, amen. And that's not how it works. And so rather than like, yes, do I want Pierce to talk again? Yeah, more than anything. Do I want him to hear again? Yeah, more than anything. But at the same time, I know for a fact God is changing my heart because I'm asking him to change my heart to become more and more comfortable with the fact that Pierce is not going to talk to me like I hear other kids talk to their dads, or run around and play baseball, and all these things that I selfishly want. But God is changing my heart to see the goodness that is in Pierce's interesting noises that he makes, and all these kind of things. So I would say, listen, if you have enough faith, good, because that means your heart's going to become more like Jesus's heart. And that may not be what you want it to be in the moment, but it's a good thing in the end for sure.
Gosh, such a good word and perspective that so few Christians, I fear, truly carry into trials and tribulations in this life, where often subconsciously or consciously we have allowed ourselves to believe that God's will and God's job is to make sure that we are taken care of, that we're healthy, wealthy, comfortable, and happy as we define those terms, which I might add is very different from the picture that the Bible paints of the truly good life and the truly rich life. And so that serves as the perfect segue into our next conversation, which was in episode 5, where we explored those big theological questions a bit further. Is it always God's will to #bless us? What does that even mean and look like? Does God promise prosperity to his people? And if not, if that's not what my life looks like, if that's not my experience, am I doing something wrong? Kelly is a total documentary fiend and an Enneagram 5, and so she would eat documentaries for breakfast, lunch, and dinner if she could. I'm more inclined to turn my brain off completely and indulge in mindless entertainment as an Enneagram 9 myself, but every now and then I will watch a documentary that sticks with me, and so American Gospel was one of those movies, which explores the way that the health and wealth prosperity gospel has infiltrated and really poisoned Christianity in the West. And so I specifically and vividly remembered one pastor's testimony that they feature throughout the movie and just chucked up a total Hail Mary and landed the catch with my dude, Sean DeMars. And so Sean is a pastor in Decatur, Alabama, and in episode 5, he shares his personal story of becoming a Christian, but then quickly finding himself swept away by the American prosperity gospel, the name it and claim it word of faith movement. And you'll hear in that conversation the lengths to which this skewed theology endangered Sean's faith as well as his literal life. And ultimately, how Sean's eyes became opened to the good news of Jesus Christ. And so in a conversation that starts and ends profoundly personally, Sean did take a couple of minutes for kind of a high-level intro equipping piece just on what is this false teaching that has spread like wildfire in the West, known as the prosperity gospel. Here's Sean DeMars.
It's very difficult because it's not just one bad idea, it's like 7 bad ideas all wrapped up into one really, horrendous doctrine. So and when you talk about the prosperity gospel, you're kind of also basically talking about the word of faith movement. The two just go hand in hand. But there are some core characteristics, okay? It may look one way in one scenario and one way in another scenario. So like in the jungles of South America, it may look like this. In, the suburbs of Atlanta, it may look like this. It's kind of like Mexican food, right? So like whether you're eating Tex-Mex or authentic Mexican food, or Mexican food in New England, which is like the worst Mexican food I've ever had. No matter how it manifests, it's all like meat, cheese, tortillas, right? So what are the kind of meat, cheese, and tortillas, the core elements of the prosperity gospel? Well, one, it's exalting the gift above the giver, right? You love God for what he can give you, not for who he is in himself. This is the opposite of what the psalmist says, Asaph, when he says, "Whom have I in heaven but you? There's nothing on earth I desire besides you." He's saying, I don't care if I have anything else as long as I have you. Well, the prosperity gospel inverts that. You have this idea of trying to remake God into your own image. So if you look at like Greek and Roman mythology and you study all those the gods of the pantheon, you'll find that they're all very human, right? And that's just human beings trying to project themselves out into the deity, right? They're selfish, they're malicious, they're lustful. Whereas the true God of the universe is not like any of those things. But that's what we do as sinners. We try to remake God into our own image and into our own likeness. So the God of the prosperity gospel likes what we like, wants us to have all the things that we want to have, doesn't want us to have any of the things that we don't want to have. The prosperity gospel has an aversion to suffering, or if they do allow for suffering, they only allow for it in a very narrow way, like persecution. But no room for suffering outside of that. So these are some of the core elements of the prosperity gospel that, even if you can't define it, if you go into a church and you see these kinds of things, you know that you're in a prosperity gospel church. It could be like a Benny Hinn Creflo Dollar church, or it could be just a squishy evangelical church. There's a spectrum here, but wherever you see those kinds of things, there you are in the prosperity gospel.
Well, the reality is that the call to follow Jesus faithfully is a call to suffer faithfully. As we look at God's word and the ministry of God's Son, we find that following Jesus does not promise us an easy road in this life, but it guarantees us so much more. That's what led Jesus to say in John 16:33, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, for I have overcome the world." One of really the most damaging consequences of believing that God will bless me in the American dream sense of the word is that inevitably and invariably hardship hits. It finds us all. It is the great equalizer. And when it does, it can seem difficult or impossible even to reconcile our faith with our circumstances, which is why that belief that God always wants us healthy and wealthy and happy and flourishing in the worldly sense of the word in this fallen world, it has led to countless people going astray and led people into despair when their experiences do not fit that description. It's utterly heartbreaking in a number of ways, a huge obstacle, and more than anything, it leads people to leave the very God who loves them and is pursuing them in their sufferings. And so that relational nature of our God, our Creator, became the point of emphasis in our next conversation on the podcast, which was centered around primarily the topic of prayer. And so it's one of the most foundational parts of knowing and walking with God, and yet for many of us, it is also one of the most challenging parts. Our friend JP, Jonathan Pokluda, he leans into that struggle. And in particular, he leans into the tension of when God doesn't seem to answer many of our most heartfelt prayers, especially in a season marked by sorrow and suffering. So here's just a 1-minute clip of that.
We can even see in this that there is something that God is doing, and it's still not our greatest desire. And that's okay. At least for me, I feel permission not to pretend like it is. And it's like, hey, God did not give me what I wanted in that scenario, and I trust him, and he's good, and I don't regret 1 minute asking him for that. Like, I don't have to walk around and make excuses for God so that I can pretend not to be disappointed by him. Right. I can say I'm disappointed by the way he answered that prayer, and I believe he's good. And one day I'm sure it will all make complete and total sense to me. And today it doesn't. And that's okay. That's the messiness of any relationship. Yeah. And it's okay that we have a messy relationship with a deity that we don't completely understand. I don't even understand my wife, much less a deity that created the heavens and the earth.
Yeah, man, that was a powerful conversation for us because it was a very personal conversation for us, as JP was one of the people that were very present throughout our season with Abel, and we had the chance to reflect and revisit on much of what we processed and what we prayed for back in 2015. But whoever you are, if you have ever felt like God is silent or altogether absent, or if you know he's always present, but you simply have had a hard time genuinely and prayerfully connecting with him, then I think you'll really appreciate that conversation with JP in episodes 6 and 7. All right, another pair of sweet friends who were near and dear and present when life turned upside down for the Crawfords 5 years ago is Ryan and Allie Wall, who are our next guests on the podcast in episodes 8 and 9. If you have lived enough life, you know that there are times where we feel left wanting and waiting. Sometimes these stretches seem to last for an eternity and leave us wondering if our heart's longings will ever come to fruition. And so we sat down with Ryan and Allie to hear about their experiences, where they just shared authentically about their experiences with abortion, with adoption, with infertility, and with all of the conflicting emotions along the way throughout their journeys. And so here's just a 2-minute clip we wanted to share again, just where Allie, she just shared some really honest reflections, specifically after Ryan's mom passed away, prior to them being able to conceive biologically, and just processing the pain of that dream having slipped away. Here's Allie.
That season when, my mother-in-law passed, I just went into depression and had PTSD things from my abortion, just around death, like anything around death, really came back to me really heavy, and I was in a dark place, and honestly the toughest place in my walk with the Lord, and this wrestle with God of, here I feel like, yes, I was really jacked up, in a season of my life, but now I feel like I've been on a straight and narrow. I'm serving at the church and working at the church, and we're loving Jesus and we're pouring out, and God, like, why don't you throw me a bone? Like, I'm being faithful, you know, and I'm doing all the right things, and I'm not rushing, you know, to do medical treatments that, you know, doctors and other people may encourage us to do. It's like, hey, I'm trying to trust you. I'm trying to do this the right way. And like, why don't you just throw us this bone? Like, why would you not let us get pregnant before his mom passes? Like, to experience that together. And so that is when I'm grateful, the realization in my time with God that my faith isn't marked by seasons of wrestling. The fact that I was still turning to God and questioning to him, even yelling at him or arguing with him, I was still going to him. And that it was okay to like not be okay. And that didn't mean I was less of a Christian, or that like I just needed to pray more, or and I've done that to people. Like when people have struggled, I've been like, well, are you in the word, and are you praying? And you know, well, here's a verse.
Man, yes and amen. And gosh, if you're like me, you just appreciate and admire the heck out of people who are willing to put explicit words on what all of us have thought and felt in one way or another at one time or another. And so you can count on Ryan and Allie Wall to do just that if you know them. And I would encourage you to check out episodes 8 and 9 if you missed out on that conversation. All right. Last but not least, final conversation in season 1 was with none other than Matthew Lyle Mooney, who went before us and profoundly shaped our perspective in loving and losing Abel, because he and his wife Jenny also loved and lost their firstborn, Elliot, who had trisomy 18 about a decade before Abel. Matt and Jenny released a balloon every day of Elliot's life for 99 days. And they got to love and care for Elliot for 99 days. And they would go on to become the co-founders of 99 Balloons, which has a vision to change the story of disability by proclaiming the worth and the image-bearing beauty of each and every human being. You can find out about their kingdom work that they're doing all over the globe at 99balloons.org. As a sidebar, Matt also has an incredible podcast called Atypical. So you can search Atypical or go to theatypicallife.com to find that. Candidly, this conversation, not our best audio work, but hey, you still don't want to miss a minute of episodes 10 and 11. We're going to wrap up with a 90-second clip where Matt really reflects on a profound question that they were asked, he and Jenny were asked, when they chose to adopt their daughter with significant disabilities after losing their firstborn son. Here's what Matt said.
Early on, I received this question, like coming out of Elliot and losing him, then having two typically developing, beautiful, wonderful children, Hazel and Anders. You know, somebody, most people know me, I kind of tend to have my opinions out in front of me. So most people wouldn't ask this probably of me, but we got asked by someone, and I actually really appreciated the honesty of the question. After so much hard, why did you choose hard? And I really get that. I really understand that question. Like, we chose hard, right? In the eyes a little bit of the world when we adopted Lena into our family. Certainly for her siblings, it's aspects of it that are hard. You know, and to us, it just goes back to that 2-bucket example where we think that life is lived not in avoidance of things that we perceive as pain, suffering, or difficult, but in the nearness of Jesus within all of that. And, you know, we are not the heroes in the Lena story. She is the hero of the Lena story. We are the recipients of her life, and we are the recipients every day of, like, it's hard and it's beautiful. She is the reminder of that reality to us all the time.
There was honestly several clips we could have shared from Matt, but that one felt especially appropriate to close with, as it truly captures the vision behind these conversations and behind this podcast, which is that every parent and every person can experience hope and joy even in the midst of sorrow and struggle. While the reality of suffering in this life can lead us to question the reality of a good and loving God, it is mysteriously and profoundly possible to understand God less and yet somehow come to know him more as we share in his sufferings. And indeed, the deepest beauty and the greatest good is all too often found in the hardest parts of life. So where do you turn when life turns upside down? Our prayer is that one step at a time, one day at a time, you would make the courageous choice to draw near to the Lord, even when it hurts. And if you do, we trust that you will come to find that he has already drawn near to you. Special thanks one more time to christianparenting.org, our partners in this podcast initiative here on season 1, and we look forward to jumping back in for season 2 in 2021. Stay tuned and subscribe to the podcast so that when it comes back, you'll be the first to know, my friend. And until then, I'll leave you with one of Kelly and I's favorite scriptures in hopes that it will encourage you with the eternal perspective that followers of Jesus can carry, made possible only through his life and death and resurrection. This is 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 16 through 18. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal.
This has been the Life Upside Down podcast, powered by Christian Parenting.
Our vision is that every parent and every person might experience hope and joy even in the midst of sorrow. If you found today's content helpful, we'd invite you to pass it along to a friend who might be encouraged as well.
You can find us at christianparenting.org/lifeupsidedown, and we hope you'll continue the journey with us in the weeks to come.
We'd also invite you to check out ablespeaks.org to learn more about the mission we've given our lives to. We'll see you next time.